Dr. Locke here. One last video to help you guys out in terms of writing G&M code. We're going to talk a little bit about relative coordinates. Right now, you are looking at the absolute coordinates that I programmed, or that I actually started writing to plan out my program. Here is the program for absolute coordinates. What you're going to need to do for relative coordinates is you're going to need to go back to your original documentation. You can either go ahead and do new initials, if you'd like to do something a little fancier or something less fancy, but go ahead and go back to this block. There is another block set up for you for relative coordinates right here, relative incremental. And you can go ahead and redraw those. I would recommend, if you don't want to have two of the same thing, or if you want to just go ahead and do virtually, do both of these, see if both of them work basically the same, then you'll only need to cut one block when you're done. The main difference between absolute and relative is your reference point. Absolute coordinates reference the origin throughout the program. The relative coordinates might reference the origin to going to the first point, but from the first point on, what you're going to be doing is all you're doing is referencing the previous point. Now, I'm going to help you walk through just a couple of letters just to see how much easier it is to do relative coordinates. You're actually going to have to type less in a number of these lines because you're only going to worry about the direction that's actually moving. So, for instance, if I were to draw my K again and just worry about K, and I'm going from A to B, C, D, and E, then I know that my first set, letter A, is 0.3125 and 0.3125. I can go back to my old chart and recognize that I am not going to be moving the X direction when I move to B. I could put a 0 here, or in the program, I could just leave it blank. I'm not even going to reference X when I move to B. I will, however, have to figure out how far up I'm going to be moving. And so I'm going to have to do a little bit of math here. I'm going to have to take 1.6875 and subtract it from 0.3125. And that should give me 1.375. So I'm moving in the Y direction 1.375 when I move from A to B. So when I combine these two, I will end up, B will be at the coordinate 1.6875, but instead of referencing the origin, B is actually referencing point A. C is moving to the right by, move down here and see how far over it's moving. It's going from 0.3125 to 0.9375. And if I do the math real quick on that, that should be 9 minus 3 is 6, 0.625, about 5/8 of an inch. So my X is moving here. And so if I add A and C's X coordinates, I would get 0.9375. But I'm going to leave Y blank because going from point B to point C, there is no change in the Y direction. Now, as I go through this and write this out, I will have blank spots where I would have put zeros. And when I go to program this, I will notice that my setup is pretty similar to the first program. I'm going to start with absolute coordinates, therefore the G90, and G20 is, I believe that's by default anyway, so you don't necessarily have to type in G20. I don't believe I did for the CNC coding. My XY is referencing absolute, the origin right there, so I'm still at 0.3125, but now I am going to relative coordinates here in G91. So notice the change there. That also means I have to be extremely careful about when I'm dropping into the part and how far, because I was up a tenth, now I'm in relative coordinates. I will be dropping not 0.0625, but negative 0.1625, because I have to take into account the Z that's here and dropping a 1/16 of an inch. So I'm plunging a 1/16 of an inch into the part, but I'm no longer at this point right here, after this, I'm no longer referencing the origin or 2.0000. I am now referencing whatever my previous one is. So those two now are referencing each other. And that means every time I want to go up out of the part, I can go up 0.1 and then drop down 0.1 or something to that effect, where I just have to remember that I'm going relative to whatever I had, and I just need to make sure that my tool comes out of the part all the way. Now, take your time writing this code. It's going to look similar to the previous code, except that there are times when you will not have an X or a Y when there has not been a change in the X or Y direction for a particular point. So if point A and B don't change in the X direction, I'm just going to reference Y on the line where I'm moving from A to B. Because B and C don't change in the Y direction, I'm just going to reference the X change. And then when C goes to D, I'm going to be changing in both the X and Y direction, and D and E, I'm going to be changing both X and Y. So there will be times when I do reference both of those. One of the ideal ways of using relative coordinates is if I see patterns in particular things. That way, all I have to do is, if I can reference those changes, I can actually copy patterns throughout. And so that's one of the ways that we'll look at in the future how we would use relative coordinates. But for now, what I want you to do is be able to draw your letters just like you did, or you can be a little fancier, or you can do something slightly different here. Referencing your points throughout, making sure that you go through and do your relative incremental coordinates like I've done here for A, B, and C. Do the math, make sure you know what direction you're going. And when you program it in CNC motion, you're going to verify whether or not you have it. So this might take some time, but I think you've gotten enough information in order to accomplish this task. Again, if you are getting any errors, I will try to check back with you to see. So please email me, and if you have a picture of the error, I could probably troubleshoot it without too much of a problem. But don't let this get until Friday and not be able to do these things. Make sure that step by step you're able to do this stuff, so that by Friday you'll have this entire project done.